Good afternoon, everyone that has joined us once again for our PropFunders Community webinar. This is March. It's hard to believe now we're coming to the end of the first quarter of 2026. How time flies when you're having fun. So good afternoon, Brenda. How are you?
Fine, I'm very good.
I'm sure you're having plenty of fun in the PropFunders business.
Yes, absolutely. Because I get to work with you. How could it not be fun?
Of course. I'll leave the attendees
People
to
can take
decide on
from
that
that
one.
what they will.
I was going to say we can ask the attendees to put their comments in the chat box.
Yeah.
Maybe on that one. But just housekeeping, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today will last around about 30 minutes, maybe slightly shorter than normal, because we're going to do things a little bit different today, which Brenda will explain in a moment. But for those that maybe are on for the first time, this is a monthly webinar held by Prop Funders. It's really for our community. There are those who join live, and we do thank you if you've taken the time to join live today. But a lot of our community would watch the recording on our YouTube channel. It's really quite amazing, Brendan, to see how many people in the weeks after watch it, and also from so many different places, some cases around the world.
Yep, definitely. There's an interest in UK property worldwide. It's always been a market that tests the pulse, I suppose, of the Americans probably wouldn't agree with me on that, but it's always been a focus for people across the world to be interested in UK property and not just London. That's the other thing.
Yeah, no, true. I was going to say there's not maybe a lot of agreement between the US and the UK at the moment, but we'll maybe
That's
leave
true. Maybe not
we'll
go
leave
there in
world
this webinar.
yeah, we'll leave world affairs for another day.
Yeah,
We'll stick to property today. So
that's good.
today was advertised as a focus on the buy to let market. So what is happening in the buy to let market? And today we thought we'd do something a little bit different, Brenda. So I'll let you explain what the plan is, and then we'll get into the market update.
Well, as you're well aware, we usually have a special guest. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it today, so we've had to just rejig and just get myself involved in this. But what we haven't done in a very long time, I don't know if we've ever done this on a community webinar, is actually interview David and ask David some questions and put him behind the nine ball and see how he gets on in the hot seat instead of being the one that puts other people in the hot seat. So that is the plan for today. But we're also going to touch on the buy-to-let market as well because we do have experience there. So we're going to do a little bit of both.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been interviewed by my business partner and my wife. So that'll be fun. But as Brenda
Yeah.
says, our background started off in buy to let, so we're absolutely dealing with the topic that we said today. What's happening in the buy to let market? As you'll hear, Brenda and I have been involved in buying and selling over 100 buy to lets within the UK. So a very strong track record in that market. But we'll talk a little bit about our journey in that, but then also where is buy-to-let as a strategy in 2026. That's absolutely what we're going to deal with. But before that, Brenda, we always like just an initial start off regarding
Yeah.
a snapshot of the property market. So
Mhm.
here we are, middle of March. What has caught your attention for this month?
Um, well, you obviously have a lot of external pressures on the market at the minute. People aren't sure, especially with world affairs, how that's going to filter down and detract from what is quite a good picture at the minute. But so far, there haven't been many changes really. There's been steady growth, as you can see. The average house prices have actually risen. So that's maybe the spring surge, as they call it. But base rate at the minute still holding steady. We're not really thinking about many changes in the base rate, possibly in the near future. I think inflation's kicking up a little bit again, especially with pressures on fuel prices, energy prices. So it's unlikely then that the base rate's going to move an awful lot. I wouldn't think that would be a sensible thing to do, maybe to take the base rate down or up at the present moment whenever there's so much pressure on households. Um, but as you can see, there's been the most mortgage products since 2007, which is an interesting stat. And the fixed rates deals below the sub 4% are still there at the minute. And we have to
Yeah,
say
which
at
is
the minute because that could change.
yeah. I think that most mortgage products since 2007 is very interesting because
Mm,
we've had some really solid growth in the property market over the last number of years, but it shows you how diverse the market was and the many choices you had. If you're a buy-to-let landlord back in the late 2000s before the credit
yeah.
crunch, I mean, there was just so much choice. The lenders were literally throwing money at landlords, 110, 115%
Mm,
LTVs to
hmm.
encourage them into the market to go and buy property. So it is interesting that we're actually back, at least in terms of choice,
Yeah.
somewhere near 2007.
Hmm. The other thing that seems to be, well, it started off almost as a trend, where people were moving out of the big cities, London, moving in from the southeast and moving further north and west, basically. And they were looking at Liverpool, they were looking at Birmingham, they were looking at Manchester. And that trend is continuing. That doesn't seem to have slowed. There seem to be more people finding better uses for their money outside of the south and the southeast, which is quite unusual because London was seen as the property place and probably still is. It's not, we're talking about prices being down there 2.1%, but that's right across the board. There are pockets within London that are kicking that trend basically. So um, I was looking recently, I think it was Dagenham, and it actually is kicking that trend. So there are pockets within London that are still rising, still doing okay. But London usually is always a safe bet, so it probably the graph will show a little dip, but the trajectory will still be upward.
Yeah, okay. No, that's absolutely fine. But look, let's get in on to today's topic. So,
Mhm.
as you said, Brenda, we're gonna do a little bit of our journey in buy-to-lets initially with some key lessons learned, and I think there's some really interesting ones. And then we'll talk about buy-to-let now in 2026, and is it a good strategy? So,
Yeah.
I know you're going to sort of quiz me more than anything, but I'll also fire up a couple of comments back to you, questions back to you, because
Mhm.
we did this very much together. In 2000 is when we started. So I think we'll just come off screen for now and just both be on the screen together. I think that'll be easier for people. Um, so yeah. Where do you want to start? What's the first question you want to ask?
Okay. So, well, I was actually going to go not just the buy-to-let side of it, but my first question is, would you still choose property if you were yourself back in 2000 looking at the property market? And I know different landscape with all you have learned from then to now, would you still choose property?
Yeah, really good question, I suppose, to start. So my background had originally been in advertising and marketing. Played semi-professional football. Uh, was then a British Army Reserve officer for 24 years. Did a tour of Iraq in 2004. So I only really moved into property in around about 2000. You had had a bit of a property background in housing management
Yeah,
with
the social housing side of things. Yeah.
yeah, so that was kind of at that stage, you were the one that had the property knowledge. But it was around about 2000. I had some conversations with some people in property. I quite liked the idea of an asset that could generate income. I've done a lot of looking at business courses and different ideas of making money. And it's actually interesting, Brenda, because the catalyst for getting into property was actually auctions.
Hmm.
So a friend of mine had talked about how he could buy cars out of the newspaper and then go and sell them in auction and try and make some money. And I remember asking a question of an estate agent, local estate agent, can you buy and sell property by auction? This is back in like 1999, these
Hmm.
conversations. So it wasn't really a big thing back then to buy property at auction. So when I found out it was possible, I then set about seeing how they gather some money up. Formed a limited company with two other guys. One was a trainee estate agent. One had some money, and away we went. And we actually purchased 23 properties in 18 months. So to answer your question about would I go back in? Absolutely. I think property is absolutely amazing. of all the assets out there. It can't be stolen, it can't be lost. It's bricks and mortar. You can see it, touch it, feel it, unlike so many sort of digital assets today. So for me, yes, property is absolutely the number one vehicle for income growth and stability.
Okay. So just I'm going to slide off topic a little bit here. You mentioned business courses, and I know that's a hot topic in a lot of circles at the minute. There's so much coming through in social media. There's so much information being given, but usually you get a little bit of the information and then it's a huge upsell. Is there value for money still in property courses, or are you wasting your time, or are you, should you find some other route to be able to get to market, I suppose?
Yeah, there absolutely is value in some of the property education mentoring courses out there at the minute, and people have paid good money, sometimes obscene amount of money, to
Mm.
learn and to educate themselves. And there's nothing wrong with that in principle. I think my challenge sometimes has been there are some companies that are very much geared to, as you mentioned, this upsell journey, and
Yeah.
they run a very um, aggressive funnel, which has people even before they've bought their first property, has them studying what I would call some of the more complex strategies. So I remember
Mhm.
meeting someone actually at a networking event in Belfast and hadn't seen them for many years. And I got chatting to them, and they're like, "Yeah, we've done this course, we've done this course, we've done options, we've done all these different creative finance strategies." And I was, "Oh, great. And how many properties have you got?" "Oh, we haven't bought our first one yet." And I'm
Okay.
like,
Yeah.
they've spent possibly
They-
tens of
They've probably,
thousands of
yeah,
pounds.
they've probably spent enough for a deposit on a house, an actual house, to go and be
Correct.
able to buy it and get themselves set up. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are definitely some good ones, and it is very important to be educated. That is a key part of your journey. But just be careful. It's not just a money racket upsell where there isn't huge value in
Yeah.
terms of helping you after you've purchased property. So I
Mhm.
call it the difference between the theory and the practical. The courses that offer practical support, where you can ring someone up when you have a problem and
Yeah.
they help you solve it. I think
Mhm.
there's definitely value in that. The courses where you go away for a weekend, pay a bunch of money, get a workbook, and then you can't get a hold of them again. Yeah, I would be careful on those type of courses.
Yeah. I believe we'd had a conversation with Ella Hardy recently, and she talked about the sharks. She said she was so sick and tired of the sharks in the property education business that just wanted to eat up all the little fish and then just leave the
Hmm.
ocean for themselves,
Yeah,
basically, if
yeah.
we
No,
work
I
through the
think you're right.
analogy.
I think
Yeah.
you're right.
So getting back to buy to let, and this is the real kicker for a lot of people at the minute. There's been new legislation, obviously the renters' rights um, legislation that's come through,
Hmm.
and it really is focusing in on the landlord. There's an awful lot of focus on the landlord, and yes, there are some rogue landlords out there, and yes, property that people are living in should be in good condition, should be livable, should be a comfortable home. And yes, they should have the ability to stay there and not think, oh, next week I could be evicted from this house for no reason. So it's
Hmm.
not no fault of mine. I could have to leave because the landlord wants to do X, Y, and Z, or he wants to get more rent and I'm not giving him enough rent, blah, blah, blah. So you have all those issues. So for someone new coming into the buy-to-let market now, what options are out there for them? How can they start off and have all this legislation? What are the best strategies that they could take or use that would help them to get a good solid footing?
Okay. Well, so certainly the way you framed that question, there would definitely be some value in going to either some individual or a company that specializes in buy-to-let. So if someone thinks, "Yep, buy-to-let's my strategy," then get speaking to some people who are successful in that strategy. I mean, that's to me a great principle in life. Don't take advice from someone who's not an expert in that field.
Yeah.
If your car breaks down, you don't go to your local baker and ask for advice just because they're a nice person and a professional person. If your
Mhm.
car breaks down, you go to a mechanic. So if you're interested in getting involved in buy to let, then go and talk to someone, get a cup of coffee, and you'll find most people who are successful in life are willing. If you offer to buy them a cup of coffee and ask them for half an hour of their time that you want to pick their brain, but most people will do that for you,
Mhm.
just out of sort of common humanity, and they'll respect the fact you've even asked them. So that would be my first thing I think I would do is get talking to
Mhm.
someone who's doing it right now and is successful. And then after that, there's effectively a business plan to be done in terms of what is your end state.
Yeah.
What are you trying to achieve? Is it a financial goal? Is it a number of houses or properties? Over what time scale? So all those things will come into the mix. How much money have you got yourself right now? And much money have you got to go and find for deposits? Who are you gonna use as the funder of your projects, et cetera, et cetera. So all those factors to me go into a business plan, Brenda. You got to sit down and treat this as a business. I think this would be the common
Mhm.
theme today is that you've got to treat the buy to let strategy as a business.
Yeah.
It's not that you've got another business and you do a couple of buy to lets on the side. You've got to have the mentality that the buy to let strategy is a business, and we'll come on to
Mhm.
things like structuring in a minute. But that would probably be my first advice is talk to somebody who's doing it and is successful, and then have your own business plan sorted about what you're trying to achieve, when, and how.
Yeah. Okay, look. So you talked a little about strategy, and buy to let is obviously one strategy. What do you consider, and this may be a loaded question because it could be there's not one answer. What do you consider the best strategy in property today?
Yeah, I think that's impossible to answer in some respects, because there are so many different people at different stages of their journey. No, from our point of view here, Brenda, we had like almost 10 years of really just focusing on buy-to-lets.
Hmm.
Um, and yes, it was interesting. It was fun. I remember sitting down and actually paying for a mentor at one stage in about 2005 or six. And when they had saw what we had done at that point, we've probably, I don't know, been involved in buying 50 or 60 at that stage, buying and selling. And their advice to me was stop buying single properties.
Hmm.
You need to be going out and buying 10 packs of 10 and 15 properties now. Because
Hmm.
to buy one and sell one, you're just limiting. Time is so precious. To put time
Yeah.
into buying a
And
pack of
yeah.
10
And
isn't
at
much
that
more than
stage,
one.
yeah. And at that stage too, though, it wasn't so common for buy-to-let landlords to be limited companies. It wasn't, it
Yeah,
wasn't cost effective or it wasn't a good strategy at that time for a
yeah,
buy-to-let company. So you were very much selling a property and taking your capital gains
yeah,
hit if you needed to, if you'd sold more than one
yeah,
that year. So
yeah.
it was a very slow process in that way.
Yeah, well, in fact, it's a good point you make because, certainly we had a number of years where we sold not because we wanted to sell necessarily, but because it made sense to sell to get the capital gains on that property. Because if you ever had to try and sell three or four or five in a year, you were going to get hammered. So you're absolutely right. Back in those days, not many people, as sort of individuals, did limited company structures or LLPs. Whereas now that is probably the only way to do
Yeah.
to do it when you take in section 24, um, and all the other factors around running a business. It probably makes sense now almost in every case. Some accountants may disagree. I'm not an accountant, not giving financial advice to make that clear, but I think most people I know would now do their buy to lets in a limited company.
Okay. Okay. So we'll cover a bit more on buy to lets a little later, but getting back to you, if you could change one thing in your property journey, what would that be? If you one thing you could say, if I had changed that or done something differently, that would have revolutionized it, or that would made it a lot easier for me, or that would have made it much more straightforward. And I have to say,
Um,
David didn't get any of these questions before I started,
yeah,
so
as
I'm
you can tell,
literally
I'm well.
throwing them at him.
Brenda insisted on these being completely off the cuff and with no preparation. Um, I suppose the answer to that would probably have to be choose business partners better.
Mhm.
That unfortunately, is probably if I did look back over 26 years in property, um, more recently, those who know our journey um, chose a business partner who proved, unfortunately, to um, yeah,
Not have the company's best interests at heart.
yeah, not have the integrity we thought they would have, and certainly did not have the company's best interest at heart, and effectively decided to sabotage the company. But even going right back into the buy let stage, Brenda, um, when I first got involved, we set up a limited company with two other guys. One was a trainee estate agent, one was a guy with a bit of money, um, and two nice people in that sense. But again, ultimately, not everyone was pulling in the same direction.
Yeah.
And certainly after about 2.5 years, we then had to effectively we had 23 properties at that point, and one guy wanted to just basically break the 5 year business plan. He wanted
Mhm.
out after 2 years, and we were then forced to break up the company. We all got a few properties in lieu of our share, but had we have kept in 2002 those 23 properties,
Mm.
then by 2006-7, when the market rose, like you literally would have been um, extremely wealthy
Mm.
had we have still been part of the whole pot. So the most expensive property we purchased was £38,000 of those 23 properties. And by 2006-7, every one of those properties was worth 138,000 plus.
Mm.
So literally 23 times 100,000 was the equity that we would have had we have stayed in and not split up. So that's probably the thing I would have definitely done differently.
Yeah. And people are very keen on JV partnerships, and it is a good way that if you don't have, you maybe have a great sourcing angle, you have the ability to go out and source amazing properties, maybe below market value, you have good contacts, but you maybe don't have the capital, that equity portion. You could maybe get your 70% loan to value, 65, whatever it is at the minute, but you need that extra 35, 30% equity to be able to purchase the property outright. And you maybe just don't have that piece of the puzzle in the capital stack. So if you're looking for a JV partner, looking for someone to come in with you, what do you say from your lessons learned? What do you say people should do? How should they evaluate a partner and not just go, this guy's got money, looks like a good fit, let's get together? Is there anything you can do? Because problems will arise and personalities will change and
Yeah.
things people will want to pull in different directions. Is there any way you can protect yourself?
Yeah. Well, it's a really interesting question in terms of the buy to let market, because a lot of people think, well, we'll just do buy to lets on our own because we're only going to buy four or five. But I think there is merit in having a business partner or having a team of people, even in the buy to let space.
Mm.
And through a limited company, you can certainly structure it to protect your own personal assets. Um, in terms of deciding on a person to get into business, I think the danger is most people end up doing a deal with a business partner when it's almost crisis, almost too late.
Yeah.
So either they've got properties that they're trying to purchase and they need money, so they go to someone with money, and then they hastily get an agreement, in place. So almost the motivation to become a partner is skewed by a
Mm.
timeline or a deadline to do something. Um, I think alongside that is just the pure situation of actually sitting down and deciding, are you both aligned in your goals
Yeah.
longer term? And that doesn't happen enough. Everyone
Mm.
jumps in for the short term without thinking, like, well, where do you want to be in 5 years in your family life and your business? Is that aligned? Some
Mm.
might want to shoot for the stars, and work every moment that they can during the week. Others might say, look, I want a more balanced lifestyle. I want to have my
Yeah.
time off with the family. And that can be a clash straight away in terms
Mhm.
of one partner thinking they're working harder than the others. The last thing I'll say on that is get your shareholder agreements done or your agreements really get them done, get them legally watertight. Because ultimately, when you fall out, and most partnerships eventually are going to have a fallout of some description, some worse than others, you want to have a robust shareholder agreement, robust documents to fall back on. So don't be afraid to spend the money at the front end,
Yeah.
getting proper legal agreements in place that will protect you whenever the bun fight starts.
Mhm. And shareholder agreements, the basic ones, you can draft, or even heads of terms, if you want to call them that, or a service level agreement, whatever it's going to be. You can get the basics for those, quite easily, and then just have a solicitor, your solicitor, and it usually doesn't cost an awful lot of money for them to give it the legal once over and say, yes, that seems okay, that seems,
Mhm.
and there is always a caveat that with legal agreements, there's always somebody finds a loophole somewhere or something is not quite I's dotted, T's
Yeah.
crossed sort of thing. But as far as you can go, if you can be a 95%, yes, we've got this agreement and it's sorted, well, that's better than having no agreement and being 100% exposed as to being 95% protected, I suppose,
Yeah, yeah. I can add one more thing to that, Brenda. So, and it brings in the point I think you mentioned earlier about structure. So, again, in terms of a business partner and all of that, don't underestimate the structure being
Mhm.
important in that. So, getting a proper limited company,
Yeah,
getting articles of association sorted about decision-making percentages. I've already mentioned shareholder agreement, but they reckon at the minute, I think I saw a stat recently that 70% of those getting into buy-to-lets now are doing it through limited companies. So
yeah.
so that clearly is probably a better business route to go
Mhm.
when it comes to um,
Yeah,
setting up businesses. I think
yeah,
it's
because then it,
also
it
don't be
does
naive.
protects your personal life. It
Yes.
protects your family and your family house and all of that, where if things break down, the business, the entity sits on its own.
Hmm.
And, that's the bit that breaks up and breaks down and is pulled apart. Your family life is not. As long as
Yeah.
you haven't set your personal assets for surety against it, then you can keep the two separate.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely right in that.
Okay. So we'll move on then to your best experience in property, something that you really felt, wow, this is why I do it. This is why I keep going. This is why I wanted even to do buy to lets or other avenues, other strategies. This is why I love property. So your best experience.
Well, across the whole property journey, I'll do that, and then within buy to lets. So across the whole property journey, it's probably the opportunity to travel around the world and visit some amazing, amazing properties and sites. So I was twice on behalf of a client in the Burj Al Khalifa, trying to secure a purchase for him. In the end, it didn't go through, but when you're standing on like the, whatever it was, 110th floor or something, the Burj Al Khalifa, looking down over Dubai,
Mm-hmm.
been paid to be there on behalf of a client. That was quite nice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Canada, some fantastic bits of real estate in Canada, up in Lake Muskoka. And again, just walking around prime real estate like the Monte Carlo of North America. And again, been involved in negotiating deals for land up there. So yeah, I've been very fortunate on that front. They're probably really good experiences. Within buy to let, it's probably, I would think, Brenda, the property in Lurgan.
Mm-hmm.
I know time's beating us here. Probably got another 5, 6 minutes left here, but talking about buy to let success, for those on the call, and if anyone wants to, leave a comment, stick it into the Q&A. If I've said something or Brenda said something you want to clarify, put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll try and deal with them before we wrap up. But our best probably ever property was 98 Queen Street in Lurgan. We were managing it for a private landlord because, should have said earlier, Brenda, you and I ran a letting and management agent for a couple of years back in the early 2000s. And long story short, two old ladies had been born in the property in the early 1900s. It was restricted tenancy, they're only paying a couple of pound. The bathroom was off the kitchen. There'd been virtually no work done to this property for decades. Um, and eventually the two ladies passed away. And the landlord rung me and was like, look, I'm in Scotland here at the minute. Can you deal with this property? Can you find a buyer? If you can find a buyer, there's 5 grand in it for you. And then we had a chat and I thought, well, why don't we try and buy it? So we actually borrowed a little bit of money off my mum and dad, I think about 17,000. We went to the bank, we had 5,000 ourselves, we put in as deposit. We bought the property for 40,000. So short-term bank loan, wasn't a buy-to-let mortgage, just a bank loan. I knew the bank manager through football, so we got a bank loan, 35,000, 5,000 deposit, which is probably all we had spare at that moment in time. Borrowed 17 grand off mum and dad. So the whole property done up was around about 67, 68,000 from memory. And we sold that for £135,000 about 3 months later. And that was right in about 2007, Brenda, I think, right
Yeah.
before the credit crunch.
Yeah. Hmm.
And it was a guy I knew wanted to buy it. And I actually said to him, like, this makes no financial sense. Your rent is not going to cover your
Hmm.
mortgage payments. But he was obsessed with capital growth. And literally, so a 67 grand expenditure to then sell that for 135,000. That was a pretty spectacular win when it comes to buy to let. Probably not going to happen anytime soon again in Northern Ireland, the UK. But for those on the call now listening to this, like that is what was happening across the UK in that
Yeah.
sort of growth spurt when the market just went absolutely boogaloo
Mhm.
in the space of 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, well, I know that's your favorite story, but my favorite story is slightly different. Um, we obviously, anyone who knows Northern Ireland, and we'll talk a little about regions in a few minutes because the regions are all different and it helps to have a little bit of localized knowledge sometimes about regions, especially Northern Ireland, because many of you will know we've had a troubled past and there's areas of Northern Ireland that would be considered, I'm not going to say dangerous because that's the wrong word, but just slightly more difficult to manage. So within the pack of houses that we bought, I'm not sure when we bought them, back in 2003, 2004, we bought a pack of houses, but with the good came one or two bad. And this one particular house was in the middle of a housing estate, which was not a good area, terrible area, a lot of druggies, a lot of antisocial behavior. And this is going back into the early 2000s before the ASBOs and all the rest of it. But this particular house, anyhow, we had tried to rent it out. We were getting nowhere because we were coming up against the local druggies and they weren't happy. They were using this house as a whatever. I'm not really sure what they were using the house for. So we had bought it as part of the purchase for about 4,000. Would
Mhm.
not be right because of the
Yep.
area, blah, blah, blah. £4,000 for a 3 to 4 bed house was in a terrace. And we thought, right, okay, 4,000, we're just going to have to leave it. And then the housing executive owned a lot of houses. The housing executive is our local authority in Northern Ireland, and they owned a lot of houses within this area. And they said they wanted to vest it. They were going to give us 2,000 for it. We said no, doesn't get past the 4,000. So we basically refused to sell it to them. They stopped the vesting process for whatever reason and it literally sat there. And then about 3 or 4 years later, 2007, the house ended up, everything else around it was either knocked down or refurbished. So this particular house was the only house left standing in this area. The footprint was still there. The roof had gone. The walls were crumbling in some places.
Yeah, it was a shell, just basically a
It
shell.
was shell, yeah, and we literally still had the footprint, and we were offered 37,000 for the
Mhm.
house for doing nothing, never renting it, never whatever. So we made about 3 or 4 times the, well, maybe more than that on the house. So that was sort of because we thought that one we were never going to get rid of it, and at the end of the day, there's still money in the bricks and mortars and in the footprint. So it worked out well for us in the end, but
Yeah.
it was fun
No,
at the time.
no, that's a good one. No, that's like that, and that really maybe brings me on. I'm keen to talk about a couple of lessons learned. If you want me to do that, just to wrap up.
Yeah,
Have you any other
yeah.
questions before I do that? Anything you wanted to
Not
cover?
really. I was going to mention legacy, but maybe that's a bad word for you whenever it comes to your how you would want to see your legacy from your property journey left or what people would read into it in the future. But legacy is maybe not a good term for you whenever you're considering your other role that you have. So maybe.
Yeah, within outside property.
Hmm.
Yeah, as the Veterans Commissioner. Yeah, well, just on that, I mean, I think in terms of, if you like, when people who have met me, done business with me, and us, as the case may be, um, first of all, I'd like to think of someone of integrity, but I'd like to think I've helped a lot of people along the way. Those cups of coffee I mentioned earlier, the amount of times I've been asked to go for a cup of coffee, you meet someone, you give them some time, it doesn't make any money,
Hmm.
but you can see the sparkle in people's eyes as they begin to understand the potential around property, or you say something that's like a light bulb moment for them, and you can clearly see
Hmm.
that. Like that's satisfying.
Hmm.
So I've been fortunate to help a lot of people invest in property and make really good money from investing in property. Of
Yeah.
course, there's those who unfortunately it hasn't went well, but there is risk versus reward. And we ourselves really since 2000, our main income for the last 26 years has been through property, and it's given obviously amazing lifestyle. I've traveled to 57 countries in the world in my life between military, family, and a lot through property. And that experience itself, is something that I'm very thankful for. And it's great to bring that experience to others and help them on their journey.
Yeah.
Um, in terms of wrapping up, then Brenda, in terms of lessons, um, because usually three lessons I would say to people when they're asking about your lessons from the journey. The number one lesson seems strange. The first lesson I would say to people considering to get into buy-to-let property, and if they're considering buying that first property, is the old Nike advert, just do it.
Mm.
And I still remember 2000, 26 years ago, and wondering whether we should make a decision to buy our first property. We had the money, we found we thought was a good property, it ticked all the boxes, but right at the day before having to go and sign for it, I remember just having this cold sweat of, are we doing the right thing? If this is such a good property, why have all the other experts in Northern Ireland not bought it? There must be something wrong with it. Surely they've all looked at it and know there's something wrong with it. Like, why aren't they telling me what they know is wrong with it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And there was just this real apprehension about taking that first step to buy the first property. So I would say to people, just do it. Feel the fear and do it anyway is a great principle in life and in business. And you must have that mindset and attitude when it comes to buy to let property, particularly your first one. So
Yeah.
just do it. If you tick the boxes, if it checks out your DD, just do it. The second thing I would say is definitely consider around the structure. So are you going to be keeping a personal name, maybe husband and wife or partner or whatever? Is it going to be a limited liability partnership? Or are you going to be limited company? But make sure you understand the pros and cons of those.
Yeah.
Because we have seen, Brenda, people who have the accountant that says, "Oh, no, 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 I'll keep it in a personal name," and then down the line,
They can't
disaster
sell.
because not
Yeah.
limited company, or
Mm.
vice versa. An accountant will go, "Oh, put it in limited company, limited company, limited company," and then they go and try and get a buy-to-let mortgage, and they
Yeah.
find that the lenders are very,
Yeah.
very, very reticent to lend money
Mm.
to a limited company. So it sounded good at the time from the accountant, and maybe it was good tax advice.
Hmm.
But the reality of the market is, if you're a limited company, you got to make darn sure there's a lender out there that's going to lend to a limited company
Yeah.
at favorable terms.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you've just cut off the best sources of income to grow your business. So
Mm.
the structure is really, really important. Take time, take advice
Yeah.
before you decide the structure. And the third thing, then, I always say is around business partners. They can be very good, and
Hmm.
it can be very beneficial to work in a team. You're having a good day, you maybe can help your business partner out. Then when you're having your bad day, your business partner's there for you. The things that life that take over, death, illness, challenges. If you're a one-man band and those challenges of life come, the business can suffer. If there's two partners, three in a business, well, collectively, you can make sure you stay on track. So
Yeah.
business partners can be good, but just make sure you get those with integrity,
Hmm.
and make sure you get your paperwork sorted out in terms of your shareholder agreements, and making sure all of that is in place. So they
Mhm.
would probably be my three main lessons, Brenda, I would say, for those getting involved in buy-to-lets.
Yeah, and they're very good lessons. And I think though it leads us into what we do in prop funders too, is our main emphasis is helping people. And we do have that free call that people can use. They can talk to you directly, and it's not a bot, it's not an AI, it's literally time with you. So, and time well spent. And if it's even 15, 30 minutes just to say, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Yes, I can go full steam ahead. I can just do it and get that, affirmation basically, that would be good. But I do think you need to, yeah, be careful who you're choosing, sort your structure out, and then go for it.
Yeah, and that's good advice at any stage, but certainly in 2026, I suppose the final sentences on this for takeaways is obviously regulation is increasing.
Yeah.
So make sure you're on top of regulation. We've already talked about the structure. I know you mentioned earlier there's a lot of diversity across the UK and region. So you
Yeah.
go and do a property course about a certain region, but that may not be
Yeah. They're
applicable to the region
they're
that you
very
live in.
different. Yeah. You need
So you
to
got to
have
be
local contacts and maybe local markets. Yeah.
absolutely. So that I think is very very important. But ultimately, it's about a strategy. And I'll finish with this last word on this. And I'm very passionate about this. Once you've done a proper business plan, you've looked at what your goals are. You've looked at who you have in your team. You've set your strategy. You know where you can get your money from. You know how fast you want to grow, how many properties you want to own. Once you've done all of that, taken time to do your property and set a strategy, do not be easily knocked off the strategy. One of
Mm.
the biggest challenges I see, Brenda, across the UK is someone decides to do buy to let, and then they see something pop up on their Facebook feed about, you know,
Planning
HM
uplift.
strategy
Yeah.
or about planning uplift,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden it's like, the fish with the shiny object. Off
Hmm.
they go, thinking there's an easier buck to be made on a different strategy,
Hmm.
rather than the consistency and the persistency of your chosen strategy. You cannot underestimate the importance of just being consistent in
Hmm.
your strategy, and the persistence of just doing it week in, week out, month in, month out. That's where success in property lies. Not in the quick fix, not in the new strategy that nobody else ever thought of before that's going to make you a millionaire in 3 weeks. It's find your strategy, and as long as that's a sound strategy, have the patience to stick to that strategy.
Hmm. Yep. That
Cool.
sounds
Okay,
good.
so yep, so just wrapping up, YouTube channel. Again, we've got a number of people, and again, Brenda, it's amazing to think the amount of guests we've had on the channel.
Mhm.
Such a diversity, but it's there. I think Angus Griffin's still the last one that's actually up live currently,
Yeah.
as the last one we've posted. So an ex FCA enforcement officer, does buy to lets, interestingly enough,
Hmm.
and some HMO stuff. So if you've liked what you've heard today and you have more questions about buy to let, tune in, listen to Angus.
Yeah.
They're most of them around about an hour, and you get some really good insights from
Yeah.
experts in property.
Right across the board, we've got a range of different people with different skills and expertise, and you can just pick out the gems that you need, and it's just really, really informative and an easy listen. That's the other
Yep.
thing. It's a good, easy listen.
Yeah. Okay, so our mission remains, hasn't changed. What gets us out of bed in the morning is saving property developers and investors time and money by structuring, sourcing, and simplifying property funding. So, as Brenda said earlier, if you want to reach out to us, there is our bit.ly link. You can screen grab that now. And I suppose we're behind the time, Brenda. We need to get a wee QR code on
We
the go
do. Yeah.
for this. We've been using that on other
Yeah.
education webinars. We haven't put it
Mhm.
onto this, but certainly you can grab this, reach out to us, give us a shout. Happy to have a free 30-minute call and see if we can help you, whether you're an investor considering investing in property, whether you're a developer or fundraiser looking to access funding, whatever the situation, reach out to us,
Yeah.
and we'll
You
have a free
can get
call.
us through the website too, propfunders.com. That's another way to reach out for us out to us. There's a lot more information there, or directly at support@propfunders.com, and we'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that is us. Anything else, Brandon, before we finish?
Nope. That was good talking to you. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for the questions, and for those that joined us live, thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed that wee session. And if you're watching this as a recording, again, hopefully you get huge value out of it. And I've tried to give you some really good lessons learned that are applicable to the buy-to-let market, but also the wider property market, and indeed business and life in general. So I wish everyone a very successful rest of the week. We'll see you again next month.
Right.
All the best. Bye bye.